he was supporting some other boys' ranches down south in other states like Tennessee or something, I think was one of them. So, and again, he seemed to be getting let off easy, just like Bush. His accomplice was that PE teacher from the Catholic school named, I think it was Gerald Richards. Now, he was arrested on July 23rd of 76. And about 6 days later is when they raided the island. But for some reason, the prosecutor there in this town called St. Clair, he accidentally closed the case on Sheldon and another person that was involved with the last name Grossman. So Sheldon effectively was tipped off and fled the country, like cleaned everything out of his other house and just took off and went. Now, they found later that some of this child pornography that Bush and these other fellows were producing was being sent to. So then, as late as like September 27th, so it would have been over 2 months after the PE teacher was arrested, they still hadn't issued a warrant for this Grossman, who did remain in the United States, and the prosecutor said apparently he was just too busy to do that. So that's, special. And then now, just real quick here, so the other people that were involved, there was a Bob Moore, Richard Lawson, and a Ted Lamborghini. Now, Lawson was, making statements to police at different times when he was arrested, saying he knew who was responsible for the Oakland County child case. But his arrest was in Pennsylvania, and they're saying, oh, well, Pennsylvania didn't know what he was talking about, but that seems kind of weak. I don't know. So it was like 20 years before, apparently, detectives from Oakland County and surrounding areas even got wind of this information. So he said that he was with Lamborghini and this Bob Moore, who was, the videographer guy. They called him Bad-Eyed Bob. They were all at this guy's house for some kind of weird party. And he said that Bob Moore had a photo album that seemed to have pictures of Timothy King in there, and that this Lamborghini kind of laughed and said, hey, doesn't that look like the King kid? And so I don't know, exactly what Lawson's role, Moore's role, Lamborghini's role was in this thing, other than, they were in possession of some of these pictures and apparently found that amusing. They were ultimately, I think, all arrested, but none of them were ever charged with the actual Oakland County child killer case. Now, I did note that, I kept saying all the kids were very clean and their clothes had been washed and they had been bathed and fed. This Lamborghini apparently was a neat freak. And so my thinking is that maybe Bush and Sloan and these police officers or whoever these guys with badges were maybe transporting the children, and perhaps they were being kept at Lamborghini's house and then filmed by this Bad-Eyed Bob Moore. I still can't find what Lawson's connection to this is, but there's just so many players in this. So Green said that Bush Mark Stebbins, and remember in the polygraph test, Bush said he killed the King kid. So they're at least responsible for one or two of the deaths. After Green was arrested and Bush died, it all stopped, and right shortly after that, they disbanded the task force, which, I mean, you still need to be looking into this because people can be convicted posthumously. I mean, you still want to find out who did it, even if they've since passed away. So it's just very odd. But at some point, Gregory Green was dying, and so his cellmate, who was also his boyfriend, received his deathbed confession, and he said that he was involved in the murders of the 4 kids. And I guess the cellmate was really shaken up about that. He brought this information to the police, and he was in tears. But it seems that Green was admitting that he was the killer, even though previously they said Bush killed at least one of the children. Sloan, who had been a former volunteer fire department, not only did he have a badge, but he had access to like medical grade cleaners, that are designed to destroy bodily fluids, for sanitization and stuff. And that seemed kind of coincidental. But he again wasn't the neat freak. It was Lamborghini. But I don't know if he was supplying him with these chemicals. Now, and there was another witness that I just recalled. And I won't give his last name, but his name was Michael. And he was a young kid who was victimized on North Fox Island. And when the little boy Eddie went to the police, they went and picked up this Michael. And I guess they just harassed this kid, threatened him, and so he shut down. He had a lot of evidence about the happenings at North Fox Island, but didn't speak to the police initially. He actually called this PE teacher and said, "Hey, the police just picked me up." And so he quickly got rid of a bunch of his evidence. And so why they're threatening these kids and trying to make it the kids' fault again, it just seems, I don't know, like a cover-up. And then, so just wrapping it up here real quick, we have these people refusing polygraphs. Not only did Gunnels throw a polygraph, but Lamborghini was offered a polygraph in exchange for A, a shorter sentence, and B, to be transferred to federal prison and enrolled as check fraud as opposed to child molestation if he would take a second polygraph. And he actually refused. And so he was in jail for a very long time. So I don't know if it's because he had more involvement than he was willing to admit to, or if he also was in fear because of all these supposed suicide. Now, and there was one more little tiny player in this, a man named John Hastings, who came forward many years later to a reporter, I think she was. She had like a crime vlog. And he said his brother was in possession of the weapon or all these different things. But I think at some they determined that this was most likely a hoax. So I can't really comment on that. But that name also was part of this. And then, so one more just kind of odd little thing is that Arch Sloan, who had the car where the hair was found, he, I don't know. First he said that he let people borrow his car all the time, like pedophiles. But then at some point he said he actually sold his car to a police detective. And I think he said the detective's father was the head of the first task force. And so there was some verification that this was sold to the son of a state police lieutenant. And I'm not clear on if his father was the head of the task force or not. But a man who later became like an investigator on this was the son of the former head of the task force. So, I mean, this whole thing just reeks of police involvement, police cover up. You know, and I'm not going to say that this guy was one of those, but it just seems very highly coincidental. Anyway, this particular officer who, you know, ultimately joined the task force himself came at some point and said that they had found saliva on Christine's jacket. But whoever they thought it belonged to, they ruled him out. It said that it was because it was mitochondrial DNA, and that can only come from women, which is not true because men have mothers. But then he said he forgot how he was able to actually rule the guy out, and then later completely redacted his statement, said that it never happened. So this, you know, mitochondrial DNA issue came up a couple times where they were saying, well, because it passes down from the mother's side, it could be 20,000 people. We're not going to look at it because we can't use it to narrow anything down. But when you run this through these, you know, DNA databases, you can narrow down what city the person lives in. You can narrow down, you know, approximately how old they are. I mean, there are uses for mitochondrial DNA. And these statements, again, are suspicious because it was actually mitochondrial DNA that identified the hair in Chris Bush's vehicle on, I think it was on Jill Robinson's sweater, as belonging to the Gunnels individual. And so they were using this DNA, but then coming back in other ways and saying, oh, well, we can't use it. Anyway, so it's just a crazy case. But thanks for watching. Good night and God bless.